This is a talk that I will give next week or in 2 weeks at the WRSA. I've not given it before, that's fair warning. And I asked Vicki, I guess, it's my fault, if there's room for a trial run. I did not expect you to create an extra session. But anyway, here we are, and I'm happy you're all here. So this is joint work with Peng-Yu Zhu, and some of you know Peng-Yu, and he's an alum of our school. He's currently assistant professor at Boise State University, and he and I are both interested in this topic. Now, Peng-Yu, you may know, you may not know, wrote a dissertation on, I think he called it telecommuting. There's telecommuting, there's telework. There are different sources on these data, and we're not yet clear what it all amounts to. You know, everybody knows that modern tech is a big deal in our lives. I think the other day I heard on the radio that when YouTube went down, there were calls to 911. I'm not kidding. People were complaining, you know, YouTube is down, help me, help me. So, you know, the world has changed. And the world has changed, obviously. So the question is, what does it mean for our cities? And have our cities changed? Or how likely is it that our cities will change in response to new technologies that we casually use all day, every day? So it's kind of an amazing thing, right? There's this, this explosion of techie stuff in our lives, which we take very, very casually, and we know it's a very big deal, but cities kind of look the same, and cities change slowly. And I think, so there's this is a challenge here to figure out what's going on. Some of you may know in 1987, the economist Bob Solow said, you can see, I think you can see computers everywhere, and I think that's before they're all networked, except in the productivity statistics. So the productivity statistics, or the data we have, are typically not so good at picking up these big things that are going on in our lives. So that's sort of a puzzle and a challenge. Everybody who's taken a course in urban economics or urban anything knows that people in cities want two things. They want space and they want accessibility. They want interaction opportunities. And because, you know, you take a few million people who want both of those things, and you have an intellectual challenge at least to figure out how it is that the cities we have, the land markets we have, the institutions we have, mediate these wants. So then a corollary of this big question is, what do modern modes of communication mean for interacting and therefore for cities? So that may be a question that you've sort of turned around in your heads over the years, and there are no end of really juicy quotes on this question or this puzzle. I think in 1999, there were some books written on what, the death of cities, or the death of distance, or the end of cities, or that stuff, right? 1999 wasn't that long ago, right? And these were pretty smart people. Well, some were smart people who were saying these things. Some people in this room may have said things like that, and some people in this room may have even written things like that, which are published and forever in print. But who the hell knows? Anyway, so statements like that, I think it was about 1999 that, the death of distance, the end of cities, well, that runs up against a very big deal in cities, which is agglomeration economies and the power of agglomeration. So here we are again with these centripetal and centrifugal forces working against each other, and that's the story of cities anyway. So here's a juicy quote, Johansen and Quigley: when co-location is infeasible, networks may substitute for agglomeration. This possibility of substitution means that small regions may survive and prosper. Well, I like this because it expands the conventional definition of agglomeration to include networking. And networking can be either, here we go, face-to-face or not, right? So we all do both, right? We all do lots of networking, right? And I used to tell my students, you know, why are we all here? Why are we all in the same room? Right? Why can't we have the same conversation, not in the same room? Yet, of course, I think we all kind of know the answer because we're all making sacrifices and bearing the cost of getting together into the same room because we think that is, that's a better way, or we still think that's a better way. So we're getting in the same room, having a lecture and a conversation the way people did, I don't know how many thousands of years ago. So we got this new tech, and here we are doing a very old tech thing. Everybody in this room is. But anyway, so these guys are saying that, well, there is agglomeration, and they use the word substitute, and there's networking, there's agglomeration. Sandy Ikeda, who you may remember, he gave a very nice talk when I had my little retirement episode, and he talked about what he and I talked about, Jacobs density, as in Jane Jacobs, okay? So it's not just old-fashioned physical access density, but it's the density of networking opportunities that matters. The density of networking opportunities, which may be face-to-face or may not, okay? So what we all do, what everybody in this room does, is we all manage a bunch of networks that serve us. Right? We go to campus, we have talks, we use email, we use telephone, we Skype, we get on airplanes and fly long distances to go to meetings, right? So we maintain a bunch of networks, or we choose to maintain, well, we choose and maintain, this is steady work, a bunch of networks that service our activity. So in a way, that's kind of the history of cities, but what's new now, or what has been added now, is that we have one more dimension of choice because the electronic stuff is so good. Okay, so I like this quote a lot, and here these other guys, God knows who they were, saying, however powerful information technology becomes, the way knowledge and wealth disseminated are applied depends significantly on the proximity of people. Well, yes and no. We're going to define proximity in perhaps new ways, right? So here we are proximate under one roof, but then we remain proximate in other ways also. And then there are more. Here's Professor Glaser saying, a central paradox of our times that in cities, industrial agglomerations remain remarkably vital despite the ever easier movement of goods and knowledge over space. So it's a paradox, right? Paradox, well, perhaps. But call it a paradox, call it a tension or a choice or a bunch of choices that we all make all the time. And that's what the paper is kind of about. And this fellow was saying there are advantages to face-to-face communication even in an internet-connected world. That was back in '94, remember that? Especially in the sharing of tacit knowledge. So tacit is the big word in this presentation because there are many kinds of knowledge, and we're going to say there's codified knowledge and there's tacit knowledge. So the codified knowledge, that's a spreadsheet that I can email to you, right? And all the information is there in the spreadsheet. But there are many things that I cannot easily teach you or email to you because the way some of us are still wired, and God knows how this is going to go, it's the face-to-face, back and forth that still matters, right? So I can mail you a book and you can read a book, and that doesn't mean that's the end of our conversation. Or you've unwrapped stuff and tried to read the instructions, and you read the instructions and they don't tell you what you want to know, what you have to know, right? So the interaction stuff is, of course, in our lives still pretty essential, and we recognize that as soon as we think about it for a minute and a half. And therefore, there's the question, maybe it's a matter of taste, right? What kind of information do we accept? Do we accept impersonally over a medium, and what kind of information do we desire to have? Do we best digest if it's provided to us in the form of a conversation where we make eye contact and all those other things that people do when they are in the same room? So, you know, I guess another way to say it is that I know how to ride a bicycle, but I can't write it down. So there are many things that I cannot really write down in a way that is adequate for transmitting it to you and others. So that's a riddle. And then finally, as you know, the evaluation of so-called good versus so-called bad substitutes is subjective and personal, right? We all come out quite differently in this discussion. And the big question, of course, will virtual reality ever feel real, right? Who the hell knows, right? Maybe it's a generational thing, and maybe all of us old people in this room, right? We're all old people, right? Someday we'll all be old people, right? And maybe it is a reflection of our past, or a reflection of how we have always learned and interacted, that we don't settle for the virtual. We drive to campus to get the person-to-person, the real. So that's all kind of background to what's going on here. So Peng, you and I are certainly not the first to ask this question, and a bunch of researchers have addressed these questions. And broadly speaking, there are two empirical approaches. Some people study clustering policies, knowledge spillovers, and agglomeration to the extent that they can, to the extent that these are researchable empirical questions. And then other people take a different approach. They study commuting habits, and commuting habits are pretty cool because we have data, right? We have okay data. So the question we're asking, how many people now choose to work at home? Is their residential location choice affected? And our question in this presentation, does occupation matter? Does occupation matter in this choice? Now, from what I've said so far, you're going to say, sure, occupation matters, because everything you've said about the exchange of information, in some occupations, it is sufficient, perhaps, to exchange information or ideas electronically, and some other occupations are rich in terms of the tacit information content, and if the tacit information content is critical, then less so, right? Then less so. So whether the glass is half full or half empty, I don't know. Maybe that's something we can discuss at the end. Okay, so does occupation matter? We're trying to look at the nature of information exchanged. I said there is, broadly speaking, what we call codified versus tacit information. Knowledge is more complex than information. Codified is easily exchanged, tacit is not. I've said all that. And, you know, these become interesting things that we're not just exchanging, well, call it what you will, but we're looking, I think the key word here is extended. We're looking at extended communication or interaction possibilities, and nuance, emotion, and trust are established not easily electronically, but these are pretty important to us. And we don't know the extent to which these can be established with any credibility in an other than a person-to-person situation. And I guess I cannot overemphasize this point that what would you do all day if you didn't trust people, right? What would you do all day if you didn't trust people? You would not do much, right? And in our culture, I think we take high levels of trust almost as a given, and we operate accordingly. We don't spell out contracts and agreements all the time. That would be an awful life, and not much would happen, right? So if this is part of the establishing and maintaining trust relationship story, then of course it's pretty big. So in this research, we're looking at variations in the choice, in the reported choice to work at home, and we're asking, does occupation explain more than? Now, the runners-up are city type, which we think we understand a little bit, and local area planning regime, which are other city descriptors that we have some data on. So those are the competing questions in this discussion. All right, so the data are ACS, public use micro data sample. We're looking, one of the mode choice options is work at home, and the data are reported the mode choice option by occupation. And so what they call tran work is, in this case, the respondent's primary means of transportation to work over the course of the previous week. Primary means of transportation was that used on the most days or to cover the greatest distance. And these are, I guess, Census Bureau definitions. We started the research, the discussion, by looking at the 10 largest ACS, CSA was consolidated statistical? Combined, thank you. Areas. Those are the big metros, right? The combined metros. And we started with 23 of the major occupations. Now, there are, the way the data are reported, there are hundreds of occupations. And it is heroic, which we did because this is our first cut. God knows if there'll be a second cut, right? So these 23 major occupations, there's a lot of aggregation that takes place to get those. And maybe in another life or whatever, we'll do this at the more detailed level. And maybe that's where the interesting stuff is, I don't know. Now, the national data for this question are for 2000, 2012. In fact, I'm embarrassed, it goes 2013, and we got to fix that. And the CSA data for a shorter period of time. All right, so here is, so first there's a table for the 12-year U.S. mode choice trends, and you'll see private auto dominance remains, minor role for public transit remains. The most significant growth is the work at home, and the glass half full, half empty. Will work at home surpass public transit? So these are those data. And so here, this is the U.S. as a whole, and here is auto use fairly constant, transit use fairly constant, other mode, we got to dissect that. But the big story is that the big growth is the work at home, the reported work at home. Now, here's the glass half full, glass half empty story. Is that a big deal or not, right? Now, transit is where it is after large amounts of public expenditures. Work at home does not cost nearly as much. And I guess it's safe to say that work at home will catch up to public transit, and we'll have more to say about that in a minute. And yeah, in fact, on that theme, here is a Brookings report. Brookings is better than we are. They went to 2013, and they say, what they try, they look at the non-auto choices, or the unconventional choices, and the biggest gain, however, came from those workers who didn't technically commute at all. With all the burgeoning broadband coverage, nearly as many people now work at home as ride public transit. And then they even created a map, and this is the Brookings map, and this is their map of the people who who do either walking, bicycling, or working at home, right? So this is the Brookings use of the same data that we're using, and the key is here, and mapping is hard work, right? So so these purple and blue balls, those are still fairly small numbers, but there we are. Okay, now the next table shows the same data for the two very different CSAs, New York and LA. And New York and LA are always interesting because the transit is way different. And now these data only go back to 2005. If you do the CSA, you don't go back to 2000, as far as I know. So here's LA, here's New York, and transit very different. Auto and transit, very different. Here's other, I got to look some more at what that is. And I guess what's interesting at this stage is that the work at home numbers are similar, right? The 7-year growth is one factor 1.2 in LA, 1.22 versus 1.23, right? So if you stop right there, you would say, well, metropolitan area doesn't matter, right? If you stop right there, which I will not do yet. So these are teasers, and the question, well, I said this a minute ago, does the nature of the CSA matter or not for this question? Okay, so we've done a couple of tests. We've done a couple of ANOVA tests. We did a Probit Estimation test. So the first test is the simplest, and the simplest is when we just looked at the 10 major CSAs and occupation. Okay, so now we're looking at the 7-year % change in work at home for occupations in CSAs. Right? All right. So here, if you look at the F values and the mean square, right? It looks like both matter at this stage. So at this stage, there are 200 observations, okay, because this is aggregate data. And so at this level, occupation and CSA both matter, but occupation matters more. So 3 cheers for our hypothesis. All right, and then we want to know something about interaction effects. And so interaction effects, we now don't look at CSAs, but we look at individual workers and individual workers in each year. Okay, so we can't do the change in the work at home because we are looking at individual workers as they reported each year. And so now we have 3 variables. We have occupation, we have CSA, and we have year, and occupation explains the most, thank God. So, so here we are with that analysis of variance result. And so we got occupation, we got CSA, we got year, then we got 3 possible interaction effects. And again, occupation seemingly wins. Here are the F values. Now the F values get very large when you have a huge number of observations, as you do when you look at individual workers, but I would say so far so good. The variable tested is the dummy variable indicating whether the worker works at home or not, as reported in this data set. Okay, so then there's the Probit estimation, and the Probit estimation is where you get to toss in a lot of variables, and the dependent variable is the dummy for each individual worker, whether he or she reports working at home in the particular year in the particular place. So again, you got the marginal effects measured by the coefficients. You've got the significant statistics and occupations with everything in there, including the kitchen sink. Well, first of all, in this table, some occupations matter more than others, right? As we would hope. And look at the one on top, computer and mathematical occupations. You would think people that spend their life coding will exchange what I've called codified information, right? So that makes sense. So that's good. I guess the other thing is that a bunch of them are very small. And then a bunch of others here are places where you can have, arts, design, entertainment, personal care services, where you can have a business run out of the home, right? And if you have a studio, and if you have a business or a studio run out of the home, you don't know whether to call that telecommuting or what, and you don't know whether that's a novel kind of situation. So again, glass half full, glass half empty. The computer and mathematical occupations result makes a lot of sense. The others are perhaps not as clear. And then in the same regression, here's year. That was in the same model. And year works, right? The more as time goes forward, the marginal effects are bigger. Not as big as occupation, right? But they are moving in the right direction because more folks, what do they say? We all carry the equivalent of a supercomputer in our pocket now. Isn't that pretty cool? I never thought I'd carry a supercomputer in my pocket. Makes me feel good. Anyway, so.
Can I stop you for a second?
I'm sorry.
Can we go back to your former slide?
Sure.
The conceptual questions that I have is, do you actually have information on the sector?
The sector meaning. Oh, you mean, okay. Well, okay, at this point, good question. These are occupations, and we can cross-tab them with where they work. Yes, that's a big job.
Yeah, I know, but you know.
Yes, that's a big job.
You've got a supercomputer in your pocket.
Yeah, right, thank you. I stepped into that, didn't I? Okay. Thank you, Lisa. Okay, these data are still too aggregated, and that's why I said 20 occupations, that's not much, so it's a first cut. Whenever somebody says a first cut, you ask, will there ever be a second cut? And who the hell knows? Anyway, so
one more
question of
information. What's the end of this? Is this in the millions as well?
Oh, this is right. That should have been in the previous.
It is. So it's the same group.
Yeah. Big number of people. And then from the same regression, so here's year, which we just talked about. And then, remember I said, does CSA matter? Okay, and how are we going to characterize the metropolitan areas? Well, the hell if I know. But so one way to what we call transit legacy cities. Okay, and the transit legacy cities, I'm told, are these guys. All right, so if you make that a dummy variable, it doesn't do a lot for you. Okay, it doesn't do a lot. The marginal effect is pretty small. So it's difficult to say. Remember, I had that LA versus New York table. That was the teaser where I said they kind of look the same when it comes to working at home. And then our friends at Brookings have a paper where they, you seen that paper, Lisa?
Yeah.
Pendall and others, right? Where they characterize the metropolitan area planning regime, and they give it these funny names, and I don't think it's a rewarding enterprise on their part, but thanks for them for doing it, but it doesn't matter. Again, the effects are very small and they're kind of all over the place. So our two feeble ways to characterize CSA is transit legacy or not, planning regime type, and
Are these all binary dummies?
sorry?
Are these all binaries?
Yes, so there are 8 realizations of planning regime, and you know you've seen the paper, right? Okay.
Yeah, no,
So,
one of the questions that I had
yes.
was the sort of distinct factors that they put between containment and things like permit caps, and then planning.
Sure. I agree with you. I mean.
I just wanted to know how it enters here.
Okay. How it enters.
Basically, there's something in the universe that you might describe as either having exclusionary zoning or not.
Right.
It's a 0 or a 1.
Yes.
Okay, and that's the way it is for all of these variables.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And look, they did a lot of hard work. They did huge surveys where they are surveying planning agencies, and they have huge questionnaires for planning agencies in these places, and then they do some kind of factor analysis, and then they name the factors, right? That's the fun part. And I think it works.
So I have a,
Yes.
I guess my question is, why should any of this be related to working at home? Then part B question is that why, what are the attributes of different metropolitan areas that you would think would make a difference?
Well, again, the biggie, I think, is this one, right? Because this one describes what we call vintage or age of the place, something like that.
Why is that a propensity to work at home as opposed to a propensity to take transit?
Well, okay, so, all right, so the better question is that, does transit opportunity matter when it comes to propensity to work at home, right? That's,
And
Even
then
better,
why
it's a shadow
should it?
variable question.
I'm sorry?
Even better, it's a shadow variable question, and all of these are proxying in some way for congestion.
That's why I was wondering why there's congestion and there's rents.
Right.
Okay, I mean, at first you would think if transit is in very good shape, or if transit is a viable option, then you would think it may matter for the work at home choice, right?
Yeah.
In the same way that if it's easier to drive, it may affect it.
Because these are all just
Yeah.
interests. And so to some degree.
Yeah, okay. I'm with you. Okay, I'm interested in tacit knowledge. Okay, and tacit.
Put these things in the model.
No. I understand. I'm just saying. No, I'm trying to say that tacit knowledge is an occupation thing, I believe. Okay, and what are you going to do to compete with occupation? And these are feeble representations of opportunities in these CSAs, right? Or interaction opportunities in these CSAs. So, yes, I mean, these are, I think I used the word feeble, right? Feeble efforts to represent. I mean, I would be keen to see other representations of metropolitan areas that may matter in this discussion. At the moment, I haven't got any, but I think that's a logical question, right? Now you can go back. I mean, this thing. I had that L.A. New York slide, right? And L.A. New York are different in every way except work at home. That was the point of that slide, right? And that's kind of borne out here, right? So these places are different. It's a big and an interesting question. Can we describe city differences in meaningful ways? And maybe we cannot. And I think so-called transit legacy, the way it's described here, is sort of an old standby that at least American cities. I mean, this is a way that we can put them in different bins. And the 7 up there, you can argue they belong in a bin by themselves, right? Okay. All right, so the approximate relative magnitudes are as expected by our hypothesis. Some occupations are most important. There are some recent years next in importance in the expected sequence, and city type planning regime are the least influential. That's the empirical finding. So what do we know? We know that cities change very slowly, right? We know that. We know that in America, suburbanization trends continue in spite of everything else. We know that VMT per capita has been declining in recent years for the first time. We don't know why. And we also know the workplace configurations are not frozen in time. They change also. So there are new office configurations and whatever they call them, right? Hoteling things in workplaces. And so here's, suburbanization goes on in America in spite of, well, maybe because of, in spite of, who knows, what's going on. And so, conclusions. Cities compete, everybody knows that. They thrive, meaning they attract labor and capital if they enable people and businesses to thrive. That makes sense. All of us, labor as well as capital, participate in many supply chains. Everybody in this room participates in many supply chains as buyers and as sellers, right? And so we're all networked in many ways, right? And that's what I said an hour ago, that we all choose a bunch of, we choose a bunch of networking configurations that work for what we're up to, what we're into. So location choice is complex. In light of the many roles, right? The many roles that we participate in all these supply chains. So propitious location and communication choices are part of finding the efficiency sweet spot. I like to call it a sweet spot. You know, a lot of literature in our field focused on the journey to work. You know, let me tell you something about the journey to work, and then that's all I need to know. Well, that's a little bit crazy, because we all have other things going on in our lives besides going to work, and that's what's going on here. That's why I say propitious location and communications choices, right? Location and communications, right? These are simultaneous choices. And if some transacting can be done electronically, the choice set will expand even if the choosing becomes harder. That's pretty obvious. And then you've seen this graphic that for the first time ever, US VMT per capita has started to decline. Do we know why? That's to what extent is it linked to the story that I've been telling you? The short answer is I don't know. And then, I don't know yet. And then that's been going on not just in America. That's been going on in many places, except Germany. God knows why. And so here are the big research questions, which I guess are part of the discussion we've been having. Anyway, so I told you it would be short and sweet and simple, and I thank you for your questions, and if you have other questions, please.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so at the risk of bringing up the nasty variables again, given that you have these occupational effects, I strongly suspect, and I brought up the concern about the sector, I strongly suspect that those occupations are not equally distributed among cities either, right? And it kind of makes me wonder about the capacity for detecting any sort of real difference at the metropolitan level, or even at lower levels, when you have the possibility for industrial agglomerations in such a way that would actually explain more.
Right. Okay. There are industry mix differences, right? So you're saying?
I'm saying, for example, that you have the tech industry, lots of those folks telecommute, and they also happen to be located in a place with a strong planning regime. And so as a result, I'm not sure what you obviously have more of your variation. I'm not sure you would ever really be able to detect difference in regime effect, given that you don't have these occupations randomly distributed across these regions.
Okay, so San Francisco is one of the transit legacy cities in this thing, right? So the CSA is big enough to get all your techie industries. So that's supposed to do what then?
But it's also, so it's there, and it's the industry is there, and the transit legacy is there, and it's hard for me to tell.
Oh, yeah, okay, yeah.
Sorry,
yes.
I wasn't more clear.
Yeah, okay.
Do you,
Yeah,
oh,
thank you.
I'm sorry.
No, I'm done. He's shaking his head.
One of our students who graduated in December did her dissertation on a similar topic. And she actually looked at the share of telecommuting across different metropolitan areas. And there is actually a surprising amount of difference from one to another. And the most significant explanatory variable for it was industry mix. So, sorry, the high-tech places actually really do, are very evident. So, she was looking at it from sort of a different angle.
No, I understand, but I'm sorry, go ahead.
So, and as Lisa says, those high-tech places tend to have some attributes in common. So if we're picking those up, then that may be the proxy for sector.
Okay, but in the Probit regression, the occupations, including the coding, whatever the occupation is, competes with cities, right? So does that take care of your? Well, it's in the same regression.
Oh, you're looking at occupation, which is correlated with sector, but not exactly the same thing.
Yeah, okay, I got you. Okay, so these are all in the same regression.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. See,
Yeah.
I'll have to. I'm going to reveal my biases right now. Things with 3 stars with an N of 2 million.
Oh yeah, I know. Of course. I just ranked them here. The stars mean nothing.
You know,
of course, I agree with you. Yeah, the stars mean nothing, and they're just ranked by order of marginal effects. That's all.
Well, the marginal effect is going to bounce around depending on what we're talking about here. That's what I think Jen and I are starting to get a little worried about.
Yeah.
Peter, it seems like there are two cost margins that people are trading off across. And one is the cost of the commute. The cost of the commute. And it sounds like that these land use variables are probably proxying for something about commute cost. But expensive commute, you're more likely to work at home, ceteris paribus. And the other margin is the cost of not being present. You're hypothesizing that some occupations, it's relatively less costly to not be present, and some of them it's, I think the construction worker, right? It's really costly for him to say, no, I'm working at home today, boss.
Of course, right. That's why he's.
So it seems like it'd be interesting to somehow try to have an empirical contest between those two, because it seems like
Those two meaning?
Those two factors, because if the observed growth in commuting at home is due to a change in occupational structure, it's going to go forward. And if you find that there's not much role for trading off commute costs, there may not be a lot of role for differences across metro areas or policies that cities may engage in. But if it's the converse, if there's a reasonable margin to cover trading costs, commute costs, then some of these other factors come into play. So what I'm wondering is, I don't know the answer, but is there an empirical contest you could set up between these two margins?
So just going back to Moshe's dissertation, my favorite hypothesis, I had two at the time, was that there had to be a role for congestion and there had to be a role for rents, right? Because if you're in an itsy-bitsy tiny apartment, it's not going to be nearly as pleasant to work at home as if you have your own study, right? If you're working on the side of the counter or something. And neither of those were significant. in terms of explaining an individual's probability of working at home. It had
So
to-
where did that leave you?
It left us more with the industry sector occupation discussion. It was about the nature of, I'm trying to reinforce your sort of fundamental hypothesis.
Yeah, thank you.
Coming from a different
Thank you, thank you. I mean, look. Okay, the fact that this guy is on top is pretty cool, right? That is not construction or massage therapy or whatever, right? Okay, so this is stuff that people are more likely to do at home. So that makes all the sense in the world.
Well, they're more likely also to be self-employed.
Fine, right? But you can be self-employed and work at home, right? So, and again, that's why I keep saying, glass half full, glass half empty. I don't even know, because you know, how far can it go? And you know, transit is at a plateau. Is this stuff at a plateau, right? And you know, in 1999, people were saying the death of distance, right? Thank you. And now here we are. What is it? It's 2015, right? And again, I have no idea whether to even think about it in terms of.
Also, just
Yes.
just to help you out, right?
Yes.
The other thing that in the literature talks about sort of like, you know, there's the supply side here too.
Yeah.
And that is to say, in some sectors or some fields, there's much more propensity to offer the opportunity to work at home. As it turns out, actually relatively small share of all employees have the option of working at home. But in these high-tech industries is where the offering of working at home is also the highest.
Right, but that's attached to my story, isn't it?
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
Thank you,
I'm
thank you,
providing
thank you,
more
thank you.
evidence.
I need it. Yes, thank you, thank you, thank you. Yeah, I mean, again, I think it's conceivably interesting stuff. I think we're interested in the cities, we're interested in accessibility, and we ask these questions all the time. Back in 1999, if you would have asked this question, and if we're plateauing now at 4.4%, who would have thought that? But of course, we don't know if we're plateauing or not. But
I have a couple of questions. The first one is, I think there might be some role of changing demographics. For example, we keep looking at changing travel behavior of millennials or baby boomers, first baby boomers. I believe a millennial can contribute, you know, might have contributed to increase of those teleworking. I believe it shows higher than other generations. So probably there is some role. Probably you might consider that one in the future.
so
research.
cohorts that are more comfortable.
Because we are seeing more millennials, and also we do see increasing baby boomers. They are getting out of the job market, but millennials come in and they tend to live in big cities, and all those dynamics contribute to more telecommuting. And the other question is probably there might be some impact of Great Recession between 2007 and 2009. I think looks like there's no serious impact of recession, but that's. Probably, if you already look at that element, then probably good to you. But third one is more important to me because we are very interested in projecting future, telecommuting pattern because it helps regional planning agents a lot because, we can achieve, a lot VMP reduction as a result of this genetic pattern of increasing teleworking and. Probably we don't need to put a lot of money making that happen. So how do you see the possible projection of telecommuting in nation or in Los Angeles area?
I don't know. Right? I don't know. I mean, we've not yet explained this very well, right? And whether that's recession, I think the recession really hit after the peak here, right? Whether it's recession or whether it's demographics or whether it's the price of oil or whatever, we just don't know. And I don't know what kind of research has been done on this. And I was kind of, if you really want to go crazy, right, why is Germany different? Hell if I know, right? Who knows? But I mean, those are part of your question, right? If we can get a pretty good handle on why these places, I mean, they all, except Germany, they all kind of turn around, right? And those are huge questions. So, thank you.